now, sitting in the Attila the Hun chair, former George Mason University Department chair, but still handsome, charming, and highly sought after by the ladies, but sadly already spoken for.
Oh, darn it.
Walter E. Williams.
That's right, Johnny Donovan. And I am spoken for already, but if I can get cloned, that will be a godsend to the women of the earth. A lot of you people just, you know me from the air, and you don't know what I look like. If you look at Hannity and Combs, you might see me sometime on Fox News. But, however, to get an idea of what I look like, let me see. Visualize a brown, what's this guy's name? Yeah, Tom Cruise. A brown Tom Cruise. A little bit older and much taller. And Kit says much more handsome as well. But that can help you ladies out there a little bit. Anyway, let's get back to business. Let's get back to pushing the frontiers of ignorance back. There's an article in the New York Times, I think. I didn't write it down. That's one demerit. That's the first mistake I made today, and that's going to be the only one. Anyway, it starts off by saying, Mexican trucks run for the border, and it's an article written by James Hoffa. He's the general president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Now, when I talk about the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, folks, keep in mind that I was a Teamster myself one day, long time ago, when I was driving a taxi cab in Philadelphia. And we had to be, let's see, it's at 103 or 123 local in Philadelphia, one of those two. But anyway, here's what he says. The Teamsters, they don't like the idea, as a result of NAFTA, of Mexican trucks on American highways. And he says, James Hoffa, he says, this debate is not about Mexican workers, nor is it about trade. It's about highway safety. He says that the Mexican trucks are not as safe as the U.S. trucks. So what they want to do, they want the Mexican truck drivers to bring the goods to the border and then load them in U.S. trucks to be shipped to whatever destination they are going to. Now, that's a lot of malarkey. That is, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation report, it found out that the failure rate for Mexican trucks in California during the year 2000 was 27%. And that's close to the national failure rate for U.S. trucks, which is 24%. And he also, and the Department of Transportation said that the Inspector General reports that the failure rate for Mexican trucks has decreased overall in the last year. Now, what these guys are after, they see that they can make more money, earn higher wages, if they can force the Congress to make a law saying that Mexican trucks can't run on our highway. Now, they don't want to come out in Congress and say, well, we don't want Mexican trucks running on our highway so that we can earn higher wages, or that we want, or the companies, American trucking companies, saying, well, we want more profits or more business. So what they have to do, they have to say, well, we're doing it for safety. And that is just another act of protectionism by the workers in the United States. Matter of fact, it's very equivalent to the navigation acts that our founding fathers fought against, that they were upset against, because what England wanted was that if goods went between, let's say, France and United States, they wanted it to sail in English ships, as opposed to Spanish ships, or as opposed to American ships. Or if a ship was bringing bringing manufactured goods to Savannah and then load up with cotton from Savannah to Boston, they did not want that, because to produce more business for American ships. It's it's protectionism, and I think that we Americans should not fall for the trick that it's done to promote safety on the highways. That is just a ruse. But getting back to this whole issue of trade, and you see that the wackos, the environmental wackos, you didn't see them out on Earth Day to any significant degree. What they're doing, they're focused their attention on things like Seattle and Montreal. They're complaining about globalization and free trade. But ladies and gentlemen, the great benefit of international trade is that it reveals stupid practices and it protects consumers. That is, if one country can make something cheaper than another country, it's saying that, let's say, country A can make something cheaper than country B. It's saying that country B should not be in that activity. It should be trading, or that it's producing the good relatively inefficiently. And one of the ways that you break down monopolies, any kind of monopoly, is to introduce free trade. Matter of fact, some years ago, I was recommending some people in Washington because they were talking about the airlines charging high prices and producing poor services, et cetera, et cetera. I was suggesting, well, why don't you allow Lufthansa and British Airways to operate flights between New York and California, New York and Denver, Philadelphia and Chicago. That is, let international carriers enter our market. Well, that didn't go over very well. But what kind of excuse could they bring up? They couldn't say, well, Lufthansa doesn't have a good safety record. They couldn't make the same arguments that they make against trucks. What they wanted to do is just keep foreign companies out so that they can charge us higher prices. We have to keep in mind that what protects the consumer is not Washington, D.C. It is trade. It is competition that protects consumers. Now, these the environmental wackos, they now are focusing on globalization, globaloney, that's what some people call it, and they're backed by whom? Who pays the tab for these people? It's unions. Unions want to keep foreign goods out so that they can charge us higher prices. Now, not only unions, but companies as well. American companies, they want to keep foreign goods out so they can charge us higher prices. A good example of that is the sugar industry. The sugar industry lobbies for tariffs to keep sugar out from the Caribbean and other foreign sources of sugar so they can charge us higher prices. And according to the GAO, the Americans pay $1 to $2 billion more each year for sugar than they would have to pay if there weren't for these restrictions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what kind of arguments people make, like the steel industry, for example. The steel industry has asked George Bush to put restrictions on foreign steel coming in this country. They call it dumping. I'll give you a definition for dumping, people. Dumping is nothing more than an undesirable price. That is, if someone's selling something for a lower price than what you're selling for and you can't sell your product, well, you call it dumping. You go to Washington, D.C. and make all kinds of complaints. And I'm very surprised, well, I'm not really surprised, that the president has come out in support, it appears to be, in support of these restraints on the importation of foreign steel. I guess he might need the votes. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people say, well, Williams, why don't you run for high political office? Why don't you become president of the United States? Why don't you run for president of the United States? And I tell them, look, to be successful in high political office, I would have to rise above principle and do the right thing. That is, there's no way that a person that can be elected to high political office in our country unless they cave to the special interests. Now, all of you people out there, many of you saying, well, let's have campaign finance reform, let's have term limits, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to work. The only thing that will work, only thing will work is that if we can somehow pass a law saying that if Congress does something for one American, it ought to do it for all Americans. For example, if Congress pays somebody not to raise pigs, they ought to pay me not to raise pigs. I'm not raising pigs either. That is, we should have laws that are generally applicable. And that is the only way that we can have true liberty in our country. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for the vacation Rush Limbaugh, and you can be on with us by calling 800-282-2882. Now let's go to the phones. And Carl from Michigan. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Ditto, Dr. Williams. How are you today?
Okay.
Good. I just wanted to, I won't say correct, but just maybe expand a little bit on the issue of the Jones Act and what you were talking about, the navigation regulations in the last segment.
Yeah.
Okay, the Jones Act is a little different in that it sets aside domestic cargo between U.S. ports to be carried in U.S.-built, U.S.-owned, U.S.-crewed vessels. And every president since the passage of the Jones Act, the Merchant Marine Act in 1936, has supported it. I mean, every president, Democratic and Republican.
Well, they've all been wrong. They've all been wrong. Now, let me ask you this question. Look, I board a sailing vessel in Anchorage, Alaska, and I would like, let's say, a foreign flag sailing vessel, and I would like to go from Anchorage, Alaska to Seattle.
Correct.
The guy would like to, the captain would like to take me from Anchorage to Seattle, but he can't do that. He has let me off in Vancouver because of the Jones Act.
If it's a private vessel, he could, only if it's engaged in cargo carrying.
But it doesn't make any difference. That is, what you're saying here is that I'm saying that there's peaceable voluntary exchange. That is, I want to go from Anchorage to Seattle. The guy wants to take me from Anchorage to Seattle. He's also carrying cargo.
Okay.
Now, why should he be prevented? In terms of morality?
Well, there are two things, and the main reason that the Jones Act was passed, and the Merchant Marine, they say, is that the auxiliary to the Navy. It's to help provide a pool of trained, skilled civilian seafarers in times of sea lift crisis, and that's politically and from the union standpoint, that's always the most common thing, and that's what a lot of people say, and it's true, it does. On the other hand, it does kind of fall back to the trucking thing. It becomes a safety issue, and I'll speak to that from personal experience. Right now, I'm a U.S. pilot on the Great Lakes. When ships come in from the ocean carrying steel from Europe or machinery from Asia into the U.S., they're required to hire either a U.S. or Canadian pilot who's experienced on the waterway.
Well, that makes a little bit more sense.
Oh, absolutely, because
but what safety issue is promoted by the fact of saying this ship cannot take me from Anchorage to Seattle?
Well, it becomes, the coasting trades. Again, it gets back to...
It's protectionism.
Well...
It's protection. It's denying me the right to engage in peaceable voluntary exchange. Now, see, if we allow one group of Americans to deny people from engaging in peaceable voluntary exchange, why not allow all Americans? That is, why not give me the right to say economists from overseas, from foreign countries, they cannot teach in the United States? I mean, or for anybody to say that to get Congress to make a law to creating a monopoly for them.
I hear you, and I understand, but again, I believe, and I think most of our politicians also believe, rightly or wrongly.
Well, it's wrongly.
It comes down to we need to have a merchant fleet because internationally, it's true. A U.S. flagship costs more money. There's no question about it. It costs more because those sailors and the owners are paying U.S. taxes.
And what does that mean? It means that the customers are worse off.
Well, the U.S., for example, the domestic fleet in the Great Lakes, I mean, we're probably, even though the domestic fleet is half the size of what it was 20 years ago, they're carrying more cargo with fewer men. They're probably giving our customers, the domestic customers, a better value.
Well,
and again, people can agree or disagree, but that's the argument that people make, and I think economically, at least on the Great Lakes, that would true.
It makes sense if you are in the shipping business. If you are a sailor, you're depending on wages and profit from shipping. Yes, it makes for higher wages and more employment and higher profit. But we have to ask, well, what about the consumer? What about the person who wants to engage in peaceable voluntary exchange? You're going to say, well, look, here's what in effect what they say. Look, Williams, if this guy and you want to sail from Anchorage to Seattle, we will shoot you. Ultimately, that's the ultimate penalty. And can you tell me, at morality, what can justify that?
Well, again, I'd say it comes back to ensuring that there's a trained, available pool of civilian seafarers to man our sea lift fleet. At the start of the Gulf War, we didn't have enough people because our sea fleet, our domestic fleet had shrunken so far. We were forced to have foreign-owned and controlled ships carry our cargo.
What you're saying? Well, we should grow our own coffee. We should have nothing but goods that are produced in the United States because they'll be very, very important in wartime.
Well,
I mean that is.
I would say that sea lift.
Wait a minute. Let me ask you this question. What about shoes? Soldiers need shoes, don't they?
Sure, and they need berets, and we almost bought berets from China.
Should we own? Should we make a law saying that to protect the American shoe industry, there should be no imported shoes?
Well, the shoe industry's almost died anyhow.
Well, should we say that there should be no imported shoes because in case of war, we have to have American shoes. We have to depend on American shoes and eyeglasses and cameras or anything else.
Well, again, I'll just say that at the start of the Gulf War, we had ships that were with foreign crews that refused to sail in support of our troops because they didn't think it was their business to get involved in our war.
Well,
we had fully loaded cargo ships sitting at the dock, and the crews said, we're not going.
I bet you I can get them to go. Just pay them more money.
Well, and that's the advantage of the U.S. crew. The U.S. crews have paid. It comes down to you get what you pay for.
That's absolutely right. But anyway, let's agree to disagree. But I will stand on the. I prefer to err on the side of liberty.
Okay.
That's.
I would extend an invitation for you to come out and see the difference between a U.S. and a foreign flag merchant ship. Anytime you get up to the Midwest, I could leave my number, and I'd be glad to show you the differences.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you for contributing to the show. Because look, on our show, we just don't want people calling in who agree with us. We want people who disagree, and we can show them where they are wrong. We'll be back after this. People who disagree, and we can show them where they are wrong. We'll be back after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in, holding forth, pushing back the frontiers of ignorance. Before we get to the next phone call, a lot of times on this show, you hear us refer to people as environmental wackos. Now, we're not saying everybody who cares about environmental issues. I love clean air, clean water, et cetera, et cetera. But we're talking about the extremists. Let me give you some examples of this, because a lot of you people, you just love these environmentalists. Let me just give you a few quotes from environmentalists that you might not have heard of. Now, here's a guy, Nigel Calder. And this is if you want to check it out, National Wildlife, July 1975. I'm going back a few years to see whether their predictions are reliable. And he warned, quote, "The threat of a new ice age must now stand along nuclear war as a likely source of wholesale death and misery for mankind." In the same issue of National Wildlife, C.C. Wallen, he's of the World Meteorological Organization, he warned, and I quote, "The cooling since 1940 has been large enough and consistent enough that it will not soon be reversed." Now, the guru of environmentalists, the person that Al Gore listened to, is Dr. Paul Ehrlich. He's the author of the population time bomb. He wrote it in 1968, and many students went through college with holding the population time bomb as their Bible. Now, here's what he said. He predicted that the Earth would run out of food by 1977, and that the Earth's 5 million population would starve back to 5 billion population would starve back to 2 billion people by 2025. Finally, what Dr. Ehrlich also warned, he went to Britain, and he warned Britain's Institute of Biology in 1969. And I'm going to quote him. He says, "If I were a gambler, I would take even money that England will not exist in the year 2000. Now, I want to know, these people are predicting global warming now, and they're talking about what's going to happen the next century in terms of temperature. And I'm wondering why we listen to these people. That is, and weathermen, you know, they can't even get it right the next day. And they're talking about, and we're listening to predictions about what's going to happen in 2050. And by the way, according to some people who have not researched the matter, they said that if there is global warming, it's uncertain whether it's caused by mankind, but if it is global warming, it may be a godsend because we're long overdue for another ice age. There's about a 10 to 12,000 year interval between major ice ages, and maybe global warming will forestall that. But again, there's very little evidence. There's very little evidence that the increase in temperature, which is estimated to be 0.5 degrees Celsius, is very little evidence that the increase in temperature is caused by the activity of men, of mankind, and womankind, to be politically correct on this show. Let's go to Joe in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Oh, hi, Dr. Williams. It's nice to talk to you. Listen, I was talking to your call screener. I want to make a point that you had said earlier that African Americans have to be more inwardly focused as their problems and not blaming outside people and others. And I think as a society, what we Americans do, and maybe I'm a little more liberal than you are, we have to look at some of the problems that we have and try to pick up on a model on how we might want to improve some of the things that are wrong in our society.
How's that?
Well, I think if we look at our education problem, you've mentioned that. Our European partners in Canada do much better than we do. If you look at violent crime, our European partners and our neighbor right to the north, Canada, do better than we do. And if you look at health care and medicine, our European partners in Canada do better than us.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Wait, well, you got to. Well, let me just ask you this question.
Sure.
You go to hospitals like Seattle, in Minneapolis, Detroit, and Buffalo, and Rochester, and you see loads of Canadian patients in those hospitals. And you go to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, you don't see an American patient.
Well, you will find some Americans. Most of that is not in those cities. Most of that creation movement is in the South and in the Southwest, where Canadians go to winter vacate in the Toronto.
They come here. They're coming here to be sick. I mean, look.
Can I ask you a question?
Well, wait.
Sure.
You know the waiting time for a Pap smear in Moncton? That's in New Brunswick. You know the waiting time for a woman?
I would probably say it's 2 months.
Oh, no. It's more than that. It's 4 months.
Well, it's 2 months in New York City now.
Oh, no, it's not. You can go get a Pap smear. I could go get a Pap smear.
But can I ask you these two questions, which are fundamental? Now, the World Health Organization writes this 23rd. Cross that border, you live 3 years longer. Cross that border, your chances of dying at birth, of being a stillborn or death at birth, dropped by 30%, from 7 in 1,000 to 5 in 1,000.
You mean if I cross the border, I'll live longer?
Well, obviously, your friend Thomas Sowell, who's a big statistics guy, would nix that as a correlation. But Canadians, in fact, do live 3 years longer than we do, and their infant mortality rate is 30% lower because they have a national health care system, which they do overutilize. Incidentally, it's not perfect.
My God, look, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, has more MRI machines than all of Canada.
But
and a matter of fact, in Canada, a dog can get an MRI before a human being. You know why? Because MRIs at the veterinary shops, you have to pay for.
Oh, I do know that they don't have many MRIs, but the bottom line is it's always the independent variable versus the dependent variable. The MRI is just a tool. Maybe that doesn't work as well.
Okay, you have to be putting us on. Look, I think that the problems in so far as education, we need more competition. The problems in terms of crime in our country, we need more guns.
Well, why doesn't that policy seem to work in Europe, where they have much lower
crime and violent crime is on the upswing in Europe. I mean, for example, look, I was going to say, you prompted me to say this a little earlier than I planned to, but in London and in Amsterdam and Genoa, you know what's the big sale item there? Baseball bats. And they don't even know a darn thing about baseball over there. What do you think they're buying all those bats for?
I have no clue, but I do know this. I do know this. Look at all we have to do.
They're beating up people with baseball bats, and I would suggest. As a matter of fact, I'm going to suggest to them that they have a waiting time for baseball bats.
Well, I love baseball, and go try. But I got to tell you something here. You look at our murder rates. Look at their murder rates. Theirs are dramatically lower and have been for a long time. And we could work on this. We're getting better. Incidentally, ours is dropping like the stone.
And you know why? You know why? Because more Americans have guns. Because there's a concealed carry law. I mean, in Orlando, Florida, the NRA started teaching women how to shoot, and the rate went down. In the United States, it's estimated that a gun is used to prevent a crime about 1.5 million times a year. That is, people either brandish their weapon, shoot in the air, or tell a person I have a gun, and the criminal backs off. In Europe, there are many times more hot burglaries than in the United States. You know what a hot burglary is? That's when a burglar comes in the house when a person is home. Okay. Now, in the United States, burglars, they will make phone calls to check whether people are home. They'll case the place. Why do you think?
Well, they don't want them there.
No, they're afraid of getting shot.
But I think that's highly speculative on your part, and I think you got to do some studies. You pull together the studies and publish them, and I'll read them. There's an excellent book on this, and it's called More Guns, Less Crime, and it's written by a colleague of mine, John Lott, and it's available on Amazon.com. Okay.
But you can read that book, and he goes through a very, very methodologically, and he shows that in the jurisdictions that have concealed carry laws that the sheriff must issue a permit if a person does not have a criminal record, in those communities, crime has fallen down. And one of the reasons, these criminals are cowards. They will attack people who cannot defend themselves. And so if they think that they can't, that their victim can't defend themselves, they will move on. But however, sometimes people have the guts to defend themselves against criminals anyway. One of the most heart-touching stories happened several years ago in my mother's old neighborhood. A guy snatched a pocketbook from this lady who was 50 years old. She ran that sucker down the street, caught him, beat the fool out of him, and held him until the police came. And she did not need a gun. All she needed was guts. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. We're back. You can be on with us by calling 800-282-2882. Rush will be in on Monday. Is that right? And the website is rushlimbaugh.com. Let's go to the phones. Mark on his cell phone from Tupelo, Mississippi. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. In an earlier segment, I caught the tail end of it where you were talking about the restrictions on products coming in from other countries.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Oh, I believe in that people should be able to trade with whomever they wish. That is, if I want to buy tomatoes from a Mexican tomato grower who wants to sell Walter Williams tomatoes, I don't think anybody should interfere with that peaceable voluntary exchange.
Well, let me explain the situation.
No, well, I'll let you explain the situation, but do you think anybody should interfere?
Well, I guess I'm biased because where I'm located is mostly the upholstery furniture division, and they're right now, Communist China is shipping a lot of product over here that the U.S. is sending money to them that's paying their employees $50 a month to a communist government, and it's killing the economy in North Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
I do not agree.
Well, whose fault is that? Whose fault is that?
Personally, I think it's the U.S. government for dealing with a communist country that's putting Americans out of jobs.
No, wait a minute. Here, look, you sell a chair. How much a chair costs that that you produce compared to one that Chinese produce?
Oh, ours is a lot more because they pay their employees $50 a month.
Well, I'm just trying to find out about how much is it.
Well, I do not know the exact figures,
let's say the chair costs $200.
Okay.
That you produce, and the chair that comes in from China is $75.
Right.
Okay, just for argument's sake. Now, if the American consumers chose to purchase the $200 chair, everything will be all right? Instead of getting the $75 one.
Right.
Okay, so it's the American consumers who you should be angry with, who are choosing the $75 chair rather than a $200 chair. Is that right?
Well, it kind of works a little different than that.
What do you mean if it works different? That if they decide to pay $200 for a chair, you'd still be in business. Right? And so it's that mean American consumer who will buy a $75 chair instead of a $200 chair, that you need to go after him. You need to say, and in effect, well, that's what you want to say. You want to tell Washington, look, this mean American consumer, he's paying $75 for a chair, and I would like for him to pay $200 for a chair, so let's get rid of that $75 chair. Let's not let that be one of his choices.
My question was, do you think it's right putting money in a communist country that's crippling the American economy and furniture?
Well, I don't care where the money goes. I think that the consumer, the American consumer, see, here's what you're saying in a sense. And tell me this, I'm not being hard on you, but here's what you're saying. You're saying that Americans shall not be free until other countries allow their citizens to be free. That is, Americans cannot be free to choose what they buy until other countries allow their citizens to be free to choose what they can buy. I don't buy that. I say Americans should be free, and the heck with the rest of the world that does not grant their citizens the freedoms that we enjoy. I don't want to hold Americans' freedoms hostage to what other countries do. I mean, see, here's what we're doing. We're, in a sense, pretend that you're in a boat with me. We're in the Pacific Ocean, and I shoot a hole in my end of the boat. What should be your response? Should it be your response to say, well, Williams, you shot a hole in your end of the boat, I'm going to shoot a hole in my end of the boat? No, what you should try to do is convince me not to shoot a hole in my boat, in my end of the boat. So I don't buy that notion that so many people they don't make it explicit. See, a congressman just could not get away with it. If he comes up and says to the American people, you shall not be free until the Russians grant their citizens freedom, until North Korea grant its citizens freedom. I say, no, I don't buy that. Americans should be free regardless of what other countries do. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for the vacationing Rush Limbaugh. Getting back to what the last caller was talking about, I was thinking about this, and somebody ought to tell me this. That is, for example, in Japan, they have restrictions on the import of many goods. And as a result, for example, dungarees, or my daughter says, you shouldn't say dungarees, Daddy, jeans, they sell for over $100, $100 and some dollars. Jeans that you and I would pay maybe $40 for. And one of the reasons why they have a high price in Japan is because of the restrictions on imports. Now, is there anybody out there going to tell me that the way that we retaliate against Japan, because Japan makes its citizens pay $150 for a pair of jeans, we're going to get even with them by making Americans pay $150 for jeans? I just find that ludicrous. Bill, welcome to the show.
And politicians or statesmen, not career people who are looking for power, greed, and big pension checks.
Yeah. So what's your suggestion?
That we get away from the rhetoric, Walter, on the term limit. I mean, on the campaign finance reform. It's never going to pass. Even if it passes, it won't work.
Oh, and it violates free speech.
It absolutely. Now, I don't know where. I absolutely do not understand Rush Limbaugh. I agree with him on many, many issues, but this, he has an absolute blind spot.
Now, my view, you might.
I've written to him. I've emailed him. I've faxed him.
You might.
Never once.
You might say I have a blind spot too, because I don't think term limits are going to deliver what all people think that it will deliver. I think people will be disappointed. I think if we have term limits, the rascals are going to do what they're doing today, but just faster. And I think what we need to do, sometimes I'm not quite sure what we need to do. And sometimes I've suggested that liberty-minded Americans, we ought to all move to Texas and Louisiana, peaceably take over the legislatures of those states, and then just issue a Declaration of Independence. Just have our own country. I believe in self-determination, just as our founders did. We'll be back the next hour.
Funding Walter E. Williams.
That's right, Johnny Donovan. I had to talk to Johnny Donovan about that intro the last time. He referred to me, I believe, as the former chair of the economics department. Of course, I'm not the chairman now. There's a fellow hired, and his name is Don Boudreau. He was the president of the Foundation for Economic Education in New York. He is now the chairman. But I was chairman of the economics department at George Mason University for 6 years. And a minor ongoing struggle with some of my colleagues at George Mason, at least the touchy-feely among them, has been to get them to refer or to address me as chairman instead of the politically correct chair. Sometimes they refer to me as the chairperson, and I don't like that, because it conceals, much of our language conceals information today, and so I've on occasion told my colleagues who addressed me as chair, I said, I can offer you evidence that I am a chairman. I am not a chair. But anyway, it's a moot point now, because I'm back to just being in the classroom, being a lazy, good-for-nothing, irresponsible professor. This language stuff, I did a column on it this week. It's in, you can check it out on jewishworldreview.com. And I pointed out that this new language, it conceals information. For example, during the 40s, for those of you who are my age, you remember there were flop houses where bums and hobos hung out. And the urban removal, or urban renewal, some people call it, accounts for the disappearance of flop houses. But whatever happened to America's bums and hobos? You might think they're disappeared because you never hear of people talking about bums. They're called homeless people nowadays. And that's linguistically, that puts bums in the same category as people are homeless because of fires, floods, and earthquakes. And so there's a moral equivalency between bums and people who've lost their homes in a flood or a fireplace. And going back to another term, I'm going to get off this. I'm going to talk about something else a little more important in a few minutes. But as a kid, I used to like to go to Tarzan movies and watch Tarzan swing through the jungles or trekking through the swamps chasing bad guys. Now, like bums and hobos, jungles and swamps have disappeared. Where are they? They just disappeared from the face of the earth? You don't hear people talking about jungles and swamps anymore. They're now called cute little rainforests and wetlands. And I think that's a political agenda because how can you get people worked up over saving the swamps, mosquito-infested swamps? Let's march for the swamps. But a wetland is a little different. It's cuter. We can't get worked up about saving the jungle. So let's save the rainforest. And by the way, one caller, he referred to me as an African American. That's a problem too, in terms of language, a new language. That is, I don't call myself an African American because I risk being confused with an American of Egyptian or Afrikaner ancestry, since both can be called African Americans. And another reason why I resist the term African American is because I'm just tired and worn out. I mean, being 65, I've gone through a number of name changes that range from derogatory names such as coon and nigger to being called colored, person of color, Negro, Afro-American, and black. Now, I refuse to change again. I'm going to leave this world black. I'm sick and tired of changing names, and I imagine white people must be confused. They don't know what the hell to call me anymore. And until I say, they'll say, the African American, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, well, black American. Then they'll switch to black. And I guess when they talk to Jesse Jackson, they go back to African American. Well, anyway. Well, look, something more important has to do with our defense. Now, here we are. Imagine Russia is arguing against a U.S. national missile defense system. And Russia is asking the United States to remain vulnerable to these weapons of mass destruction as Russia even sells weapons technologies to U.S. adversaries such as Iran and other countries that hate our guts. Now, here's the point. Now, see, a lot of you are teeny boppers. You don't know the difference. But haven't we learned a lesson from World War II? When prior to World War II, after World War I, we had the Kellogg Agreement where we destroyed much of our fleet. We had a lot of disarmament. And when World War II started, even in training, there weren't enough rifles to go around for our soldiers. Now, one of the unfortunate things of history is that old people die. And so those who are around to see the unpreparedness of the United States at the beginning of World War II, they're dead. And so some of that memory is gone. So what it means, I'm afraid, is that we'll say, well, look, we listened to Daschle and we listened to all these people in Congress, and they say, well, food stamps are more important than missiles. Prescription drugs are more important than national defense, and blah, blah, blah. And so they want to constantly reduce the amount of money that we spend on national defense. Now, I'm not saying that the Defense Department spends wisely, but there's a difference between crippling our military, and then we will be forced in a position that we have to learn this lesson all over again. The pitfalls of not being able to defend ourselves. Now, when that new lesson starts, I hope that I'm gone. I hope that I'm in heaven, sitting down, looking at you turkeys who have emasculated our military, did all kinds of things like we want women in the military, even though the sweet little darlings can't run as fast, and that they can't run, that they have ankle injuries if they wear heavy combat boots, and so women can't run with weapons, and so they say men don't run with weapons, and we're using our military as a social program to try to prove something that's unprovable. And then number two, we're using our military in places like Bosnia and elsewhere as social workers. And what military is supposed to do, what military people are supposed to do, they're supposed to kill and break up things. And so I think our country, we need to spend more money to make sure that we're prepared, and we should ignore these turkeys in Europe and in Russia that say, let's not have a defense system. When someone tells you, let's build no defense system, I begin to worry. If my neighbor next door told me, hey, Walter, don't have so many guns, I'd be worried. I'd say, well, why do you want me to disarm myself? What do you plan to do? And that's the question that we should ask these people who are critical of the United States, saying that, well, we had this ABM treaty. Well, the country that we made this agreement with, this ABM treaty, no longer exists. So we should stop kowtowing to these Europeans. And matter of fact, what I tell the Europeans who criticize us, I say, well, look, you go do your thing, and we will save you the next time, just like we saved you the last time. So I just ignore these people, and I would say that U.S., we ought to ignore these people and just go it alone on missile defense. We'll be back with your calls after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for the Vacation Rush Limbaugh, and you can be on with us, 800-282-2882. Before we get to phones, there's another issue when we're talking about truck safety. I want to talk about something else. You know, the TWA Flight 800 that exploded, they feel as though, or the investigators say that it was a fire in the fuel tank having to do with wiring. Anyway, there's this. They had this industry agency task force, and to find out ways to make the fuel tank safer. And they said that they can make the fuel tank safer by inerting the fuel tank, put in inert gas in there to take up space, whatever. And they could perhaps reduce the chances of an explosion or eliminate them altogether. But it would cost $10 to $20 billion. And they estimate that it would save roughly 253 lives. I was here listening to a report, and I just knew this person would say the following. They came out and say that you should not put a price on life. Yeah, they were saying, well, they can't do it. They can't do it because it's just too expensive. That's what the industry and agency was doing, said. And this person commenting said, well, you shouldn't put a price on human life. And then naturally follows, if it will save one life, we might as well do it. Well, there's this issue of being oversafe. That is, there's the unseen part of that regulation. Suppose it was $20 billion to make the airplane safer. How do you think airlines would compensate themselves for that additional money? Well, they'd raise ticket prices. Now, some people, as a result of higher ticket prices, they would drive to see grandma over the holidays rather than fly. And so the highway driving is far more hazardous than air travel. So suppose, let's say hypothetically, that because of higher ticket prices, people drove, and let's say 1,000 families were killed, or let's say 1,000 people were killed on the highway. Well, then is it worth spending $20 billion to save 253 lives on an airplane and had that result in 1,000 lives lost on the highway? You always have to look at the seen and the unseen. And matter of fact, some years ago, people were pushing, Ralph Nader's group they were pushing the airlines to mandate infant seats because they said that infant seats would save lives. And turned out, according to one estimate, that 20% of families with infants, they would decide to drive instead of flying because they'd have to buy an additional seat rather than the kid sitting on the parent's lap. And it's estimated that it would cost $1 billion more in ticket fares for people flying. And as a result, more people would drive instead of fly. And they estimated that there would be 82 parents and children killed each year due to automobile accidents as a result of this law. So when someone tells you, let's have this safety practice or that safety practice, you have to ask, well, what is the unseen consequence of that? And matter of fact, you'd think this way if you read Frédéric Bastiat, a very famous French economist, who actually wrote a little essay called The Seen and the Unseen. So there can be such a thing as too much safety. Now you say, oh, come on, Walter Williams, it's better to be safe than sorry. Well, how many of you got under your car this morning to check and see whether the brake hoses were still intact? I bet none of you. Well, it would have been safer if you had done that. There is a certain level of risk inherent with living in our society or in any society. Let's go to Chris in New York City. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. The fellow economist, it's good to hear the talk on trade today. But I called to talk about the fallacy that the federal budget surplus is shrinking, going away, however you'd like to put it, as the Democrats are putting it. This entire notion that because the off-budget surplus is going to be close to zero this year, and therefore the government is in dire fiscal straits, is ludicrous. A surplus is a surplus. We're still going to pay. We're going to have a surplus of like $160-some billion this year. That's going to pay down a tremendous amount of treasury debt.
They're playing games with the book.
Oh no, of course. This entire notion that we're in some sort of dire fiscal situation that you hear Democratic leaders throwing about is ridiculous. We're in a cyclical downturn. The past 2 years, we were in a major cyclical upturn, which added to the revenues. We're losing revenues because it's a cyclical downturn.
And then also, according to some predictions, the growth rate in 2002 is supposed to be double this year.
Right. If we return to trend growth, which, depending on, of course, what you want to estimate trend productivity at, it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 3.5% for trend growth. And you extrapolate that out over the next 5 years. Even with the Bush tax cut and all this pent-up spending demands that there will be in Congress, we're still talking surpluses of over $200 billion a year.
And surpluses, there shouldn't be a surplus anyway because we're...
No, that's a separate issue altogether. You're right.
We're being gouged.
No, you're right. We're being gouged. You can argue that it has had some positive, obviously going from running huge deficits to having the balance in budget or a slight surplus has crowded in private investment, reduced inflation expectations.
Well, what we need to do, what we need to do as a country is to maintain the level of government spending that we have today and just have that go on for like 20 or 30 years and the economy growing, and then government will get to be a smaller and smaller percentage of the economy. That is, we should have some kind of limit absolute limit on government spending.
Yep, totally agree.
And the only way that it can increase, because sometimes we need to increase it, it should be by 75% vote in Congress. That is, to have super majorities to vote for any kind of tax or spending increase. I always tell people that more important than taxes, we should look at spending, because spending is the true measure of government. That is, in any real meaningful sense, the effect on the economy is not taxes, but spending. Because as we saw during the 70s and 80s, government can spend underhanded by inflating the currency, so-called underhand taxing. I would prefer that taxing be explicit. We'll be back with more calls after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for the vacation Rush Limbaugh, and he will be back on Monday, holding forth at EIB. Now, for those of you who, at the beginning of the show, I said I was somewhat ashamed and embarrassed to come on before the Rush audience. And I didn't want to say it right then because I didn't want to answer any phone calls on the issue and further humiliate me. Well, let me go back for fill you guys in who don't remember. Let's see, it was 2 years ago. I went out biking with this lady, and as we were biking, she said to me, this lady, Malia, I call her a skinny white woman, she said to me that she was slowing down so I could keep up with her. Now, that is a massive insult to me, for a woman to tell me that. Now, even though I think she's like 41, 42, something like that, and I'm 65, and it's still no excuse. Anyway, I thought I'd get in condition. I stopped smoking for a while, and we went out this year. And she was saying, she called my wife. She's in my wife's book club, and she called my wife and said something, and she spoke to me as well, and she said that she and my daughter, she's pulling my daughter into this. She said she and my daughter, they would be biking. They'd stay on the bike path, but they would ask me what kind of sandwich I wanted, and they would bike ahead and order the sandwich, and by the time I got there, the sandwich would be ready. Now, this is insulting. And the thing that I'm embarrassed about is that it happened again this year. Now, see, I have a slight knee problem. I'm going to have that worked on. But next year, I promise this audience that I'm going to clean her clock. Now, what I did tell her, she came by my house, brought her father and her brother. Maybe that's to intimidate me, whatever. But she came by my house, and I told her, I challenged her to a one-on-one in basketball. Now, she's 110 pounds, if that. And she did not accept my challenge in basketball because I would have cleaned her clock good. Just like I cleaned James Goldman. He was the call screener from some years ago, and he knows about me. He can straighten out everybody about how good I am in basketball. Matter of fact, Charles Barkley is still ducking me. I mean, I've challenged him on the Rush audience for one-on-one basketball for money, and he has not responded. But anyway, folks, this is why I was somewhat ashamed to come before the Rush audience. But Rush told me that he has a forgiving audience and that the audience will give me one more chance. I might ask for 2 more chances. But let's go to the phones, and we have Robert in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wanted to talk with you about some of your earlier comments about the world, how you see our defense needs, how you see global warming. You seem to be a little isolationist.
What do you mean by that? Because I question, because I want to defend our country, and we don't want to just hamstring ourselves economically by having policy that makes no sense.
Well, I'm specifically referring to like the peacekeeping, the global warming treaties, things like that, where you're almost like Bush, like you think you can go down to Texas and go to your ranch or something, and that we can just isolate from the rest of the world.
No, if the rest of the world is doing stupid things, should we join them?
Well, we are part of the world.
Well, okay, so they're doing stupid things, so we should do stupid things.
Well, you're saying they and we, all right?
Yeah, they and we, yes.
We're all on the same planet.
Well, yeah.
Right?
We don't have to be stupid on the same planet.
Well, we have the same problems, like the environmental problems of somewhere else are our problems, the peacekeeping problems of somewhere else.
Peacekeeping Look, the Bosnians can wipe each other out, and it doesn't have anything to do with us.
Except that I guess there's missiles there's nuclear weapons all over the place.
That's right, and that's why we should have a missile defense.
Which they don't know will work, and people can carry.
And if we don't have a missile defense, and if they act like they're going to shoot at us, we nuke them first.
Which is not practical.
Why?
Because people can sneak bombs in or chemical weapons.
Yeah.
And that can't be. We can't defend against those kind of threats.
Okay, so what do?
We make a better world, and we start by having an international.
Well, I think one of the ways you make a better world is to let dictators know, let our adversaries know that if they mess with us, they're going to glow a radioactive green.
Well, I mean, obviously that would be true, but we need an international system like the United Nations.
Oh, come on. What do we need? Look, United States has been, the world would be a dictatorship if it were not for our country coming in and saving the rest of the world from, number one, saving them from Germany twice,
right,
and saving them from the Soviet Union.
That's probably true, but
that's because we maintain our strength and we maintain a military capacity, and because of Ronald Reagan told these turkeys over in Russia, I'm going to see whether you can produce missiles and walk at the same time.
Right. Well, we wore them down, but that's the lesson you learned from World War II seems to be a different.
How old are you?
Huh?
How old are you?
43.
Yeah, you weren't around in World War II, were you?
Obviously not.
No, you weren't. And I mean, we were on the ropes. That is, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, destroyed our Pacific fleet, we were in dire straits.
Sure, but we have a different world, And let me tell you the lesson Einstein learned from World War II. You know what his lesson was?
Well, make a better atomic bomb.
Is that the nuclear bomb had made national boundaries obsolete. Sovereignty became obsolete with the advent of a nuclear weapon.
Oh, come on. We can bomb Japan and not feel much from it.
Well, we can destroy the whole world. We could never do that before. We are in a different world. The world you're talking about doesn't exist anymore.
Yes, it does.
Pre-World War II.
Well, England still exists. Mean people still exist, and the